It's just after 1 in the afternoon on June 1st, 2025, somewhere on a quiet highway near Chelyabinsk, deep inside Russia. A truck driver named Mikhail is dozing in his cab, parked on the shoulder of the road. He believes he is hauling a load of prefabricated wooden houses to a construction site. He has no idea that he is sitting beneath one of the most consequential weapons systems ever smuggled across a hostile border. A jolt, a bang. The roof of the cabin above him splits open, and drones begin climbing into the sky. Within minutes, 4 other trucks, parked thousands of kilometers apart, from the Arctic Circle to the Chinese frontier, do exactly the same thing. By nightfall, a third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet, aircraft built to end civilizations, will be burning on the tarmac. And the country that did it never sent a single soldier across the border to do it. This is the story of Operation Spiderweb, and why analysts across the political spectrum, from the Center for Strategic and International Studies to independent security researchers, now describe it as the moment that redefined what asymmetric warfare looks like in the drone age. A war of exhaustion. To understand why this operation mattered, you have to understand the war it was born from. By the spring of 2025, the front lines in eastern Ukraine had barely moved in months. This was not a war of dramatic tank columns anymore. It was a war of exhaustion. Trenches, drones, artillery duels measured in meters, not miles. But there was a second war happening far from the trenches in the skies above Ukrainian cities. Night after night, Russian strategic bombers, the Tu-95 Bear, the Tu-22M3 Backfire, took off from air bases thousands of kilometers from the front and launched cruise missiles at apartment blocks, power stations, and hospitals. These aircraft were, for practical purposes, untouchable. They flew from bases so deep inside Russian territory that Ukraine's Western-supplied weapons, many of them restricted from striking far into Russian soil, simply couldn't reach them. For Ukraine, this was the central, maddening problem of the war. The machines destroying its cities were sitting safely at home, thousands of kilometers away, and there was almost nothing conventional Ukraine could do about it. So its intelligence services began thinking unconventionally. 18 months in the dark. The operation that would come to be known as Pavutina, Spiderweb, did not begin as a single strike. It began roughly a year and a half earlier as a question inside Ukraine's security service, the SBU. What if you didn't need a missile that could fly 4,000 kilometers? What if the weapon was already there, waiting when you needed it? The plan that emerged was audacious, precisely because of how simple its core idea was. Ukrainian operatives would smuggle small, first-person view attack drones into Russia, not as weapons, but as cargo. The drones would be hidden inside modular wooden cabins, the kind used to ship prefabricated houses, fitted with retractable roof panels. Ordinary commercial trucks, driven by Russian civilian drivers who had no idea what they were carrying, would haul these cabins across the country and park them, on a careful schedule, a few kilometers from the air bases that housed Russia's strategic bombers. The plan was reportedly overseen directly by President Zelensky, and it was kept secret even from Ukraine's own Western allies, a decision that avoided both the risk of leaks and the diplomatic complications of a NATO-backed country appearing to help engineer an attack deep inside Russian soil. Over many months, roughly 150 drones were moved into position. The targets were 5 air bases spanning nearly the entire width of Russia: Olenya, near the Arctic Circle in Murmansk; Diaghilevo outside Ryazan; Ivanovo, just north of Moscow; Belaya in Irkutsk near Lake Baikal; and Ukrainka in the Amur region, close to the Chinese border. Some of these bases sat more than 4,000 kilometers from Ukraine, roughly the distance from London to Baghdad. Ukraine intended to hit all 5, in the same afternoon, with the same signal. On the morning of June 1st, Russia's Military Transport Aviation Day, a holiday honoring the very force about to be struck, the trucks were already in position. The drones inside were activated remotely, reportedly triggered over Russian mobile phone networks, and the roof panels opened. At Belaya Air Base in Irkutsk, witnesses reportedly watched, stunned, as drones climbed one after another out of a parked container and flew directly toward rows of parked bombers. At Ivanovo, The drones targeted something even rarer than the bombers themselves: Russia's A-50 aircraft, flying radar stations used to coordinate missile strikes and detect incoming threats. Russia has very few of these. Losing even one is a serious problem. Losing two is closer to a crisis. Not everything went according to plan. At the fifth site, Ukrainka Air Base in the Amur region, the truck carrying the drones caught fire and exploded before it could complete its mission. A failure that also meant the driver never fully understood what he had been transporting. And this is the part of the story that rarely makes it into the highlight reels. The 5 men driving these trucks were, by most accounts, ordinary civilians, hired for what they believed were routine hauling jobs. They had no idea they were at the center of a foreign intelligence operation. One was killed in the explosion at Ukrainka. The other 4 were arrested by Russia's FSB and now face decades in prison on terrorism charges. It's a sobering reminder that even the most surgical-looking operations in modern warfare can carry a devastating human cost for people who never chose to be part of the war at all. Counting the wreckage. By evening, the scale of the damage was becoming clear, though, as with most modern conflicts, the exact numbers would be disputed for months afterward. Ukraine's security service claimed to have hit more than 40 Russian military aircraft. Independent open-source analysts, cross-referencing satellite imagery, arrived at somewhat lower figures. Outlets like The War Zone put confirmed destroyed bombers at around 10 to 11, while U.S. government assessments landed near 10 aircraft destroyed out of 20 struck. Russia's Ministry of Defense, for its part, acknowledged fires at only 2 of the 5 bases and downplayed the losses as a repelled terrorist attack. Whatever the precise final tally, one thing wasn't in dispute: these aircraft are essentially irreplaceable. Russia stopped producing the Tu-95 decades ago. The production lines no longer exist. Every bomber destroyed at Belaya or Ivanovo isn't a loss Russia can make up next year, or even next decade. It's a permanent reduction in a fleet the country will simply have to live without. And that reduction reached further than Ukraine's immediate defense. These same aircraft form part of Russia's nuclear triad, the air-based leg of its long-range nuclear deterrent. A single afternoon of drone strikes, launched from inside trucks driven by unwitting civilians, had reached into one of the most sensitive corners of Russian national security, using weapons that, individually, cost a tiny fraction of what they destroyed. The afternoon. Operation Spiderweb wasn't just a tactical success. It mattered for 4 distinct reasons, each of which rippled well beyond the war itself. It shattered the myth of strategic depth. For Russia's entire modern military history, distance had functioned as a form of defense. Bases thousands of kilometers from any front line were considered safe almost by definition. Spiderweb proved that, in an age of smuggled, low-cost drones and civilian logistics networks, geography no longer guarantees safety. It doesn't matter if a target sits deep inside your own borders when the weapon that hits it was already parked outside your gate for months, hidden in plain sight. It demonstrated staggering cost asymmetry. Ukraine reportedly spent a fraction of the cost of a single cruise missile per drone, deployed through ordinary commercial trucking, to destroy aircraft worth tens of millions of dollars apiece. In a war where Ukraine has consistently been outgunned and outspent, this was a rare, vivid demonstration that clever engineering and patient planning could offset a massive resource gap. It degraded the exact capability terrorizing Ukrainian civilians. Every bomber destroyed at those air bases was 1 fewer aircraft available to launch missiles at Kyiv, Kharkiv, or Odessa. It didn't end the bombing campaign. Russia continued striking Ukraine with its remaining aircraft and missile stockpiles. But it meaningfully thinned the fleet capable of doing so, with no quick way to rebuild it. It sent a psychological shockwave through Russian military planning. This wasn't an attack near the border. It reached the Arctic, reached Siberia, reached a base near the Chinese frontier, places that had felt, for the entire war, entirely untouchable. It told Russian planners that nowhere in the country's vast interior was automatically safe anymore. It's worth being honest about the limits of this victory. Spiderweb did not end the war. It did not force a Russian withdrawal. It did not stop Russian missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian cities, which continued in the weeks and months that followed, including, notably, a massive Russian drone and missile barrage the very night before Spiderweb was launched. The front line in eastern Ukraine did not meaningfully shift because of this operation. What it did do was narrower, but real. It proved a concept. It showed that a numerically and technologically outmatched country could still land a blow that a wealthier, larger adversary would need years, not months, to recover from. In a long, grinding war of attrition, that kind of asymmetric leverage matters more than any single battlefield victory. The shockwaves of June 1, 2025, traveled well beyond the Russo-Ukrainian front. Military planners in countries far from this conflict took notice. If cheap, smuggled drones hidden in civilian cargo could cripple a meaningful fraction of a nuclear power's strategic bomber fleet, what did that mean for the way every country protects its own high-value military assets? Air forces around the world quietly began reassessing how and where they park their most expensive aircraft. It also reopened uncomfortable questions about nuclear deterrence itself. Part of what makes a nuclear triad credible is the assumption that its components are secure and always available. An operation that visibly damaged the air-based leg of that triad, using improvised, low-cost tools smuggled in on civilian trucks, chipped away at that assumption in ways policy analysts are still studying. In the end, Operation Spiderweb is a story about a fundamental shift in what small, determined actors can do to giants. 18 months of planning, a handful of trucks, a little over 100 drones, most of them worth less than a used car. And in a single afternoon, roughly a third of a nuclear power's strategic bomber fleet was reduced to wreckage on the tarmac. It didn't win the war. Wars this size are never won in an afternoon. But it changed the calculus. For Russia, for Ukraine, and for every military planner watching from the sidelines, quietly wondering whether their own safe bases are as safe as they think. For everyone caught in between, including 5 truck drivers who never asked to be part of history, the war continues.